Welcome, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I have Kevin Campbell here with me today. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm great. Good morning.
Wow, looks really nice and calm out there where you are. Where are you at these days?
Near Seattle, and it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, so it's a nice morning. Yeah,
you got up early today, huh?
I did. Yeah.
Reminds you of back in the day when your day started early and everybody's got to be somewhere.
Well, although we've been home for months, I'm doing a lot of work on the East Coast, so getting up early is part of the job.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Because everybody's in a different time zone these days. Now everything's virtual. Hey, good morning to all of our watchers out there, everybody who tuned in to America's Next Motivator for this episode. I'm glad you're here. Grab your cup of coffee, cup of water, whatever it is that you use to get your day started, and join us for a great conversation, because we look for people who we can have a meaningful discussion with. We seek them out. We look for them, and they're not always easy to find. But today we have one of those gentlemen. His name's Kevin. Kevin, where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Southern California, Los Angeles County, but mostly raised here in Washington State. Grew up by a place called Mount St. Helens. You might have heard of a volcano.
You grew up next to a volcano?
Yes, and it destroyed our neighborhood when we were kids. Yeah.
Wow. Now I want to talk to you about what that experience was like, because your whole reality changed.
Mm-hmm.
The place where you were living, it got changed.
Yeah.
The entire dynamic of your life changed. The trajectory of your life changed. What was that like?
It's such a strange thing, because it's both, as you said, we're very fortunate in that the way that the damage happened was almost in slow motion. So people had lots of time to get out of the way. That was good. But what happened, it was what we call a mud flow that came through our neighborhood and destroyed people's homes. It stopped at the front door of our house. So everyone we grew up with, I grew up in that neighborhood. I was in high school, so I'd gone from first grade all the way into high school with the same group of kids, the same neighbors, playing with each other every day when we used to let kids go out and play. And then one day they were all gone because their homes were destroyed. And so it was the first big lesson was losing everybody and having no control over it. And a lot of them I never saw again until Facebook. My daughter set me up on a Facebook account 30 years later, and all of a sudden these people I hadn't seen since that week, all of a sudden we were friends again online. And so it was on one hand incredibly disruptive, and on the other hand we were able to stay in our neighborhood as it was. Keep our church, I had a job milking cows at a farm, and play sports and keep, it was both. There was some of it was a big loss, and some of it was having the ability to hold on to things and feel a sense of control over your life. And that really was the key to getting through it, was our ability to still feel able to have some choices and feel we hold on to some things. But not everyone who faces loss can hold on to things. Sometimes if people lose everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think just having a small idea of the capacity of who you are, that event when you were younger was almost a prophetic event in your life, because, fast forward to some things we're going to talk about later, and you understand disruption and the effect that it can have on life dynamics.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed it, but it led, part of my work came out of research on disaster. That's right. So I later in my adult life, found a connection to war and civil unrest and disaster, and the lessons that have been learned around the planet about how people recover
Right.
from major events in life. Yeah.
Right. And one of your first jobs was milking cows. What was that
Yeah.
like?
Well, it's a job like this one. I could get up really early in the morning and get the job done and then go to school. so,
Right.
so it fit the schedule, but it was tough at 16 to get up at 3 in the morning every day and get all the cows in and done and get to school by 7:30. That was, and then back to if I have a twin brother, and so we switched. I would do mornings for a week, he would do evenings for a week, and then every third week one of us would do both, so the other one had a week off. So it was just how it worked.
Did you learn anything from that?
I learned how hard farmers work and how much they love their cows. I mean, it was a family farm, and it was their whole life. And I admired. It was, by the way, run by two women,
Okay.
A mom and her daughter, who ran this place on their own and hired help. And I just admired their family's work ethic, and just it was an extraordinary learning experience. It's a remarkable thing. We just until you see people's lives, it's very hard to really know how much respect to hold for folks. But
Sure. Sure. Now, did you ever live life in a metropolitan area, a city area? What was that? Did you do any?
when I moved from Southwest Washington to Seattle. After high school,
Mhm.
I lived on the edges of the city,
Okay.
and that was about as close. I've never lived in a downtown area,
Okay.
and after a while, I moved back to a more outside to a suburb outside Seattle, which is where I've been.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was that's how we got to Washington. My dad had taken a job with the U.S. Department of Energy and was part of something called the Bonneville Power Administration. So they manage hydroelectric power from the big dams that we have on the rivers in the Northwest. And he was responsible for Southwest Oregon and I guess Southwest Washington and Northwest Oregon. So when we grew up, we lived in a rural community because it was near where his work was.
Mhm.
And he did that. He was in the military in the Marine Corps, and then he went into federal service, and and did 30 years in federal in service to the federal government.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did he ever bring his work home and teach you anything about building dams or managing them?
My dad is also a painter, and he makes violins, Stradivarius violins, and still does. He's 80 now, and I think what you learned from my dad was an extremely hard work ethic. Both my mom and my dad was from a sibling group of 12 raised by a single mom. They made a journey from the Ozarks to Los Angeles in the Dust Bowl years. And then my mom's from a family of 13. They were coal miners in Kentucky, and they made their way to Hollywood. So my mom and dad met in Hollywood, of all places, coming from two of the poorest places in America.
Right.
And so if there's one thing about my parents in both families, that they were big families, they were very poor, and hard work and looking after each other was how you got by.
Right. Right. Wow. So all of these things went into the mix that became the Kevin Campbell that we know today. How
Absolutely.
interesting.
Well, it's funny. I'll just say, Cedric, I know we have other things to talk about, but it's interesting as I'm in my middle 50s now. You don't really it takes decades to begin to piece the story together and understand and see connections between things. But I would
Sure.
agree about that. Yeah.
Sure. Now, did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have identical twin brother, and then I have a sister. Yeah, we grew up. Yeah, all within 18 months of each other in age.
So y'all were almost like triplets.
And yeah.
Hey, that's funny. I laugh because every set of twins I know is just an absolute joy to be around. They're funny. They're always playing tricks on people, swapping out, telling jokes. They're funny. They're smart. So that's another yet cool thing to know about you. Now, I'm going to cut straight to the chase because I don't know if you know this about me, but I spent years of my life in foster care. And I was adopted at the age of 15 as a teenager. And from what I understand, you have devoted much of your life and professional work to advancing the lives of children and the futures of families. Is that correct?
Well, I ended up working in a group home with older young people in the middle 1980s, and became a foster parent up for a while. I was for older teens,
Okay.
and I thought, yeah, that, I didn't go into it knowing that it would turn into what it has, but I started out working directly with young people, and again in a group home, and also as a foster parent later, and um, I think ultimately is, and one of the words you used that I want to connect to is, I learned what I thought was that these were young people who had nobody, that needed people like us to be in their lives, because that was what we were taught. And but what I could say today is, it's really a lifetime devoted to trying to find a way in this system to work with families, and not look at
Absolutely.
children as being sort of out there on their own and detached from culture, from community, from family, and from their siblings.
Now, when you talk about the mid 80s, we're talking about communities that are potentially ravaged by drugs. And because of drugs, there was neglect and there was poverty.
Yeah.
What was the atmosphere like on that group home campus where you worked?
Well, it's just, first thing, it wasn't a campus. We were deliberate about not doing a campus. It was started out as a 6-bed
Mm.
facility, crisis facility, and that I was hired to be an awake overnight staff member at. And 3 months later, they hired me as the director when they had trouble. The person who they had hired, a psychologist from Colorado, wasn't successful in her first 3 months. It crashed pretty quickly, and I was, asked to move off the night shift and take over running the place. And um, I I didn't think that we wanted big institutional campuses for kids at the time. And so when, as a director there later, we grew the business quite a bit. We became the largest um, provider in the state of Washington over the next decade,
And
and we ended 13 of those facilities. Ultimately, each of them was 6 beds, as well as other work. But ultimately, the goal was to close them
Mhm.
for me. Yeah.
If I can pause you for a second and have you explain to me, who
Yeah.
were you in 3 months that that was the catalyst from an overnight staff to an administrator? Who were you
Well,
in those staff meetings? What were you saying?
well, first of all, I probably had more experience than a lot of people. Prior to that job, I worked with older adults at the end of their lives, in living in nursing centers and in hospitals, and so I had a lot of experience with as a very young person. I was in my early 20s. I had a lot of experience with very serious matters involving the people's deaths, and working with their families. And so I wasn't probably the typical awake overnight person. I was kind of fleeing, burying people at that point in my life, and
Mhm.
realizing that wasn't my career path. So I think what happened, and the reason I became the manager pretty quickly, is that in the staff meetings and other settings, um, I had a very different experience. And so I think the owner of the place knew that, I had a fair amount of even corporate experience at that point, and so I could handle the administrative responsibilities, but also I was very strong in my commitment to quality of care and to running the place well, because I'd been trained to do that in the
Mhm.
prior job. So I just think I really had a lot more experience than everybody else.
Right. One of the things that I noticed from the outset of your career in this work as well is that you didn't come from a background of the same types of trauma or misfortune and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so you were a highly developed professional. You had a wide gate in terms of what it takes to run an organization or to organize people. But you were able to apply that to a totally new industry.
Mhm.
So you were almost like a breath of fresh air from the beginning because you didn't have the fatigue of many of your counterparts.
Well, I was always an outsider, um, and I liked it that way. That was a
Yeah.
good thing. It was good to be an outsider. I chose, in a leadership capacity, not to join um, I was on the, not the government side of it, but contractor side. So I didn't choose to lead our organization, to choose to join industry groups and start playing the game in terms of the industry itself. I really stayed an outsider, and I really wanted to focus on being competitive and on being innovative.
Mhm.
Um, in the approach to the work, there was clearly no one really should have to tell you much about the fact that this system's been described as broken my whole life. So I never thought it made a lot of sense to come into a broken industry and work hard at being broken.
Right.
You want to come in and look at brokenness and say, what can we do to make it better? And
Sure.
that, if that's what you want to call innovation, then we'll be innovative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that when you look at it that way, when you come in acknowledging that there's brokenness and you decide to be a fixer, then you immediately get into a totally new arena of work. It's separate. It's building a stadium next to the stadium, if you will.
Yeah.
And so the space is wide open for you to innovate and to be a leader when you bring those innovations back to that original stadium.
Yeah.
I remember speaking to Congress one time, and what I was essentially saying, although I was very emotional, was that my experience was inconsistent and it hurted me, and that I was tired of it, and I didn't think that it was okay. And at the end of that discourse, one of the Congress people said to me, "I thought that the foster care system was working. You mean to tell me that it's not broken?"
Yeah.
And I felt like, in her capacity as a city council member, she should be well aware that the foster care system is broken. And I don't want to feel like I'm saying a curse word when I say that I think that the foster care system is broken. So to hear you use that word
Mhm.
as a keyword, as a buzzword, it just lets me know that your heart's in the right place.
Yeah. Well, if I could say, I don't know that, of course, what this person's experience was, but you could imagine if you were an elected policymaker, who you're going to be hanging out with and who's going to be coming to knock on your door. So what if the industry is the one knocking on your door and they want to tell you every great thing they do? Everything looks shiny, everything looks right. If But there's another story to be told. Go spend time with young people in care. Go talk to their mothers. Go talk to their fathers. They actually have them, by the way. I know people in this business often talk about not having dads, but everyone has one, and they have something to say. By the way, if you want to talk to some of these dads, you might need to go to prison and talk to them. They do let you visit prisoners for a reason.
Right.
You know what I mean? As you'll hear me talk a lot about, it really depends on on picking a place to stand in the story where you can do the most good. And standing in the story of repeating the system we've got is not a place where you can do the most good.
Wow. Unfortunately, Kevin, I think that that's where most people are standing.
But that's because you get paid to stand there.
Mm.
So part of the risk, part of what makes this tough is how dangerous it is to try to make it better, because you might not be in business. In other words, the funding streams are set up to keep doing what we've always done. I mean, even today in 2020, 9 out of every $10 spent on child protection in the United States is spent on the cost of removing kids and surveilling parents. Only $1 out of every 10 is spent on preventing kids from coming into the system. So the industry is going to be made of people who are in the business of running a back end system for removed kids. And so the truth is, if people are smart about making a living, that's how you make your money. And that's whether you're an overnight awake person in the group home like I was, or you're in an executive role, that's the reality of the way the money happens. And so if you're going to be on the outside, the other thing you're going to have to face is that you're not going to be on the inside with the money.
Right. And then what do you do when you're on the outside with a worthy idea that's backed by philosophy and is backed by numbers as well, but you're not tied to the funding? What do you do in that circumstance? Do you give up?
You can't give up, because we're not making inanimate objects here. We're talking about extraordinary human beings who are in this system. And I mean that both about the young people in the system, but also their families and their cultures. And so you can't give up. And you just keep fighting. I think you have to. The other thing I would say is, because I don't want to sound like I'm demonizing people that do the work. I find the people that do the work on the inside of the system be as extraordinary as the young people in it. So I said from the beginning, my lesson about working with older teenagers in child protection was, I said for decades, I said the two loneliest people I met in the American child welfare system were a long-waiting teenager and their caseworker.
Yeah,
So I think if you were going to really do something disruptive here, you have to remember both of them.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. A lot of the time, when a young person needs to be picked up 9 o'clock at night from the hospital, they need to be picked up 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night from a home to be taken to another a respite or the hospital. It's always that social worker
That's right.
who has invested more than her paycheck or his paycheck
Yeah.
to be there. You know,
Yeah.
it's always the social worker who, well, not always, but a lot of the time, and I want to make note of it. There's a social worker who goes above and beyond to help you have some level of consistency while
Yeah.
you're in care.
So that points to something we're saying. There are people who work every day to change the system from inside of it. You know,
Right.
that the change might be that you're the one that however, whatever else you got going on in your life, you're going to get up and you're going to get out there and meet with that teenager on your caseload at midnight and help them move themselves with some dignity to the next place. That's change work, and that's a relationship, and that really matters. And I think that, so I want to be really clear. I don't think that I'm the only person working to change. I think we've had generations of social workers who've been working to make the system better. What I think policymakers have missed is how to support them to do it. It's
Right.
not an unwillingness to make it better. It's not even an unwillingness to be up all night if that's what it takes.
Mhm.
We've got to stand the money and the policy behind people that want to make it better on the outside of this system and inside of it.
Mhm. And how do we effectively create change other than the system? Like, do we do both? Do we keep managing the system that we have while we create a new system? Do we just stop and all change directions at one time? How and the reason why this is important is because of this. I feel like my foster care experience could have been better.
Yeah.
I've probably met several thousand people who were in foster care. A good 95% of them feels like their experience could have been much better. Um, so I think I'm safe in saying that we think that there needs to be a major change in the way
Yeah.
that things are done,
Yeah.
and then it's about how do we do that. So do we do that by maintaining the system that we have and helping those people on the fringes, or do we totally change direction? How do we get it done?
We've got over 400,000 young people relying on foster parents and staff and group homes and everything else we've got today in this country, and we can't simply turn it off like a light switch. That we have a responsibility to these kids to do the best we can do with them. But to your point, here's what I would say. It's I, I recently did had the wonderful opportunity to do a short webinar with Bruce Perry, and one of the things that Perry has talked about, that as a scientist, was he talks about being biologically inconsistent. So what I would say is, here's the problem with the system we've got. It's not possible to make the system we've got work because the system we've got is biologically inconsistent. It is so far away from what human beings actually need to thrive in their lives and to hold good health that it can't be incrementally made better. We just got research out of the United Kingdom in the last month, a very, very significant study looking at the health and well-being impacts of their foster care system for over 350,000 people who were in care. So this is between 1970 people in care between 1971 and 2011. And there's two components to the study, and I just want to warn people, this is difficult information, but we've got to face it. And the first part of the study was to go and find out who was in care between 1971 and 2011, and then go to the census data that's available. Right, they do a census as we do, and from the census data, what they found out was who was alive and who was dead, who had been in care, and then for those who had died, who had been in care uh, during those years. they went and got their death certificates. They wanted to know, well, how did their lives end? And what they found was that there was a threefold greater likelihood that people would die early if they spent any time in foster or residential care. And I have to say, given the revolution that's gone on in the biological sciences and neuroscience and genomics in the last 30 years, that wasn't particularly surprising, because we knew that early life adversity and unrelenting stress would lead to problems with increased risk of heart disease and other problems, and that would likely, for some people, reduce their lifespans. But that's not what they found in the study. They didn't find that these people's lives were cut short by chronic disease in that sense. They actually found that the majority of them died of what they called unnatural causes.
Mhm.
And my version of that story is they died, from the suffering they experienced in their lives of being uprooted from their families, communities, and cultures, and placed into a system that was thought to be better than the families they came from. And that their system, like our system, largely does that with very particular groups of people, African American families. If I were to talk of the U.S. context, African American families, disproportionately Native families, Hispanic families, and poor white families. And this isn't something that's an experience that's spread across the whole population. It was very specific to particular vulnerable groups. And what we seem to do as a system was raise people in it who end up, being extremely unwell. The second part of the study was they wanted to know, for the people who were still living, what do they have to say, right? I think that's really important. We could look at the historical record, but what do people who were in care say? And that was part they released about 12 days ago. And again, a very large number, over close to 500,000 people in the study. A lot for a country the size of, or a confederation the size of the United Kingdom. And what they said was, within 10 years of leaving care, 42% of them said they were in really, really poor health and really, really poor mental health. By 20 to 30 years after leaving care, which, by the way, should only mean that you're about 50 years old, 85% who were in foster and residential care said that they were in really, really poor health by age 50.
Mhm.
And that's not about the fact, because I know a lot of social workers in the English system. Some were even around for that time.
Mhm.
They're very highly trained, well educated, extremely dedicated, um, and are the sort of people who will get up in the middle of the night and go to attend to a young person on their caseload, just like our caseworkers do.
Mhm.
So we know they didn't get sick because they didn't have caring caseworkers. They got sick because the whole design is biologically inconsistent.
Right.
It's damaging rather than helping.
Mhm.
And so we're going to have to make a move. We're going to have to move from the legacy system we've got to a biologically and consistent approach that's, quite frankly, also more just than the system that we've got.
Absolutely. I think about the realm of medicine, and if a team of researchers came up with an absolute cure for cancer that was backed by research, it was bona fide, and it was published, that cure would immediately start being implemented.
Mm.
I don't believe we would have another 100 years of people given chemotherapy if we know that we had a better alternative. But it seems like in foster care, when you have science that proves that genetically and biologically we are creating a cancer, that we don't immediately go in and make rapid, direct changes to the foster care system. And young people who grew up in care, they pay for it.
Yeah.
Now, to put this in a semantic way, even though I don't want to be taken semantically, I felt like when I got taken away from my mother and separated from my brothers and sisters, that it deposited a little pocket of tears in me, and it was like a water balloon that you're putting water in. That water balloon is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until it explodes. And so I feel like youth in care, when they're taken away from their natural environment or separated from their brothers and sisters, that they've got this water balloon that's filling up with tears that they're crying internally, and eventually that spiritual water balloon, it bursts, and that might manifest as mental illness, and might manifest as psychosocial illness. It might manifest in just financial brokenness, you know. But to what extent do we say, you know what? Every single child that we take out of their home, it's like the start of a water balloon. Eventually, we know that that water balloon is going to burst. And do we want to deal with the ramifications of putting another 400,000 youth in care the same way it is now, or do we want to find a way to change direction?
Well, that is the question that we face, and we've got a historic narrative that this system is built in, um, that doesn't face it. You know, for example, the connection between these health outcomes and the experience in the system is something that researchers understand in the biological sciences, but social workers don't seem to place importance on, because we have a narrative about this being a system with a lot of people who make bad choices in it. For example, the science doesn't support a lot of bad choices. The science supports people do what they have to do to survive it.
Right.
And sometimes part of surviving it is doing something that's bad for your health, but feels right for you. Vince Folletti, who's one of the authors of the ACE study, talked about substance addiction this way. He said, what is clearly a public health crisis for America, which is substance abuse addiction, is a solution for the individual. Right. And it begins to key you into something, which is that we're extraordinarily created creatures. And we have, if we have one great gift, it is our ability to make adaptation for survival. And we do that. I mean, it's when I look at the story of people who are in care and families involved with the care system, what I see is an extraordinary group of people who are remarkably capable of making adaptation. I did a film. I saw Matt Anderson was on here from somewhere in the mountains in North Carolina, and Matt invited me with some young people in Montana to be in a film about 10 years ago called From Place to Place. And there's a young man in the film by the name of Rafe, who's one of the, we'll call him the stars of the film, and he's still a star. And I follow Rafe, and sometimes we communicate a little bit on Facebook, and I watch a little bit about the life that he lives. But and I can't say that I know him well, but the thing I know about Rafe is he's an extraordinary human being. He's incredibly capable, gifted. He said himself in the film how big his heart is, and his heart really is that big, and he's got an extraordinary capability built into himself. But that's not the narrative that we tell about people in the system. We tell the narrative of being rescued from whatever we've rescued from. Then when we've got you in the system and you're a teenager and you're not doing what we ask you to do, we can then tell a complicated story about why it's your fault. And why don't you get over it? And why don't you just take the good treatment that we've got? And everything we know tells us that's just not the way things work. So this is a long way of me getting to a point, which is simply this. There's ancient, I'm guided here by ancient wisdom. In this case, I'll quote two examples. Rumi, who's a 4th century mystic, Sufi mystic, said, "Speak a new language, create a new world." In Judaism, quite literally, they said, "Words create worlds." We need a new story, and quite frankly, the story we need to invent is a lot bigger than the story we have right now. The story we have right now is too small and too mean, and expect little from people.
I agree with you.
We need to be expansive. We need to blow this thing up. It is not a question about how we rescue people. It is how we launch people.
Absolutely.
Launch them in their lives. That's a new story, and it's the story. That's the story of the industry we're going to need to have if we're ever going to have one that actually holds out the promise that these young people and their families actually deserve, and the social workers who work in it deserve.
Mm-hmm. I think that we all need to begin to say some new things. It's time to sit down, be quiet for a minute, and come up with something new to say about the reality of what's going on and how to effectively change it. Yeah. And I think it's gonna also require some courage on the part of other people to listen to some things they've never listened before,
Yeah.
without just resorting to saying, "What are you talking about?" or "Help me make that make sense," or "I don't know what you're saying."
Yeah.
The new talk that we need to have, it might not be in your budget already, and so we've got to be prepared to talk about things that you've not been dealing with at your staff meetings, and we have to all embrace it. I'm definitely looking forward to new conversations from people all around the world. People who are watching this episode today, they've heard you say it, and I appreciate that from you. So we are going to take a brief break, and we're going to be right back to talk about some of the powerful work that you, Kevin Campbell, is doing, and things that we need to take note of. We'll be right back after this brief message.
Thank you.
America's Next Motivator, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been here for the first half of this discussion, you know we're talking about some important concepts. I want you to take a moment to follow America's Next Motivator, share the stream, invite a friend for the second half of this conversation. Hey, Kevin, we're still here.
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to remind you that I appreciate your time today. And before we get into one of the innovations that you created, I also want to acknowledge that, you know, the reason why this is such an important discussion is because there is a critical mass of people who go through foster care who they don't have a positive outcome. Their life does not look positive right now. They look like they're being neglected right now. And we're talking several 100,000 young people. And so even though some of us, we adapt, we morph into these incredible human beings, people like Dave Thomas, people like myself, people who grow out of foster care and really, you know, do the best they can with themselves. But, you know, people like me, I'm always thinking about the 10 or 15 young people I met along the way who right now they're somewhere living in the projects. They can't get over the generational deficits that they were born with. And my heart aches for them. How do you feel about that critical mass as well?
Oh, it pisses me off. Yeah. I'm angry about it. I'll tell you why in a funny way. One of the great influences in the last decade or so on me is some work in Los Angeles County that a lot of people know about, but a man by the name of Father Greg Boyle, who founded Homeboy Industries, which is the world's largest gang intervention program. And if I could just say about it is always an extraordinary opportunity to meet someone like you, Cedric, who you have a story behind you that involves time in the system and difficulty in your adoption. And here you are, tipping at windmills with us. That's a great story. But there are great stories for kids who are in the project, who were in care and who are struggling right now. And Greg Boyle is a great example of this. Let me just quickly try to do this. So Boyle's in Los Angeles. I'm from Los Angeles originally. I have lots of family there. And runs the largest gang intervention program in the country. I have a connection personally through one person is through Judge Nash, who's the former child welfare leader for LA County and holds an office related to child welfare there. Judge Nash and I next week are doing a training in Kansas, so we work together. So I have a connection to DCFS, which is the agency in LA County. Let me contrast these two groups of people.
Okay.
So probably a fair number of kids who have been removed and are in care today in LA County have parents who were involved with gangs, who became parents as gang members and lost custody of their kids when they went to prison, or were unable to protect their children and raise them safely. And so they probably have LA County child welfare workers. And I imagine to myself what it would be like to be an LA County child welfare worker and look at one of those dads or moms who's actively in a gang in LA County, look at their tattoos, look at their presentation in the world and how frightening they can be to people. And how they would look at that person as a parent. And of course, the tools that we've got would very quickly make them not parents, right? We can use a court order to stop you from seeing your kids. We can start the clock on you in terms of terminating your rights. And if you did anything especially bad, we can speed up the clock through a special circumstances termination, right? That would be one person's view. But then I've got Greg Boyle over at Homeboy standing with that same parent, guiding them to building a future possibility out of this difficult past. So the question is, who is that parent?
Right.
It's the same parent and two different worldviews around that person. And the question you have to ask is, which one is more right? The truth is, it's both. It's that people have done some bad things. It's also true that people are capable of healing and recovery. If that's true for a formerly heroin addicted gang member who committed a murder and did time in prison, if it's true that they can recover, there's not a kid that you ever knew in this system that couldn't be launched to a sense of control over their lives, feeling like that their purpose and meaning could be brought up. There's not one of them. Right. And we write them off. We've got a system that doesn't just fail in the sense that it doesn't produce the results we want. But I think we have got a narrative that's a very exclusive narrative that says people that get permanency have been rescued and everybody else is at risk. That's not good enough.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not good enough to just say that they're at risk. It's not good enough to not develop the competency that's required to heal families. The same way that gentleman, he healed himself by way of a program and mentors along the way. A whole family should be in conversations, hearing new things, learning new things that enable them to heal as a collective. And maybe that's what we need to be doing, as opposed to removing kids from families and putting them in foster care, because foster care has some kinks in it that are really hard to iron out, and it's resulting in people having an ugly life experience. But even furthermore, I think we get to the point where we just got too many kids in the system.
Look, I mentioned I was a foster parent, so I feel a respect and a heart for people who provide foster care. Here's what that English study I talked about really. If you were involved, if you were a foster parent or are a foster parent, and you hear about that English study that shows that those kids that you took into your house, whatever you thought you were doing, that you actually contributed to a greater likelihood of a lifetime of suffering and early death, that's not a great feeling. But that I want to be really clear. I think there's room in our in fact, it's necessary we make room in our communities for foster parents. But let me describe what's different in what I would imagine. Having an individual or family in your community who is the sort of folks that think that standing with a family in trouble, such that you'd be willing to get up in the middle of the night and let kids you don't know come and sleep in your house, and be present for them and be loving toward them and be concerned for them and their family, is exactly what we need in communities across this country. Some people might even call them neighbors. That's what we need. What we don't need is a back-end orphaning system that is somehow set up to be instead of families, instead of parents, instead of culture, instead of neighborhood. That's where we went wrong when we industrialized our vision of what foster care would become into these instead of structures rather than standing with people.
Right. I believe from my personal experiences that there are so many checks and balances in the biological family that are just really tough to replace in a foster care type of environment.
As a foster parent, here's the point: you don't need to replace it because it's right there.
Yep.
But you might want to have dinner with them.
Right.
You know,
you've got to build. So we need a partnership. Is what I
yeah.
hear you saying. It's like
In every case, look, here's the thing. It's not, and the partnership is not, again, another problem with our narrative. This, I'm going to do a talk in October with, there's a worldwide child protection conference that the Kemp Center's hosting, and I'm going to do a couple of talks. And one of them I'm doing is with with colleagues from Cambodia, at the Cambodian Children's Trust, with a woman by the name of Tara Winkler, who's a co-founder there. And Tara and I, 2 years ago this week, in fact, we're doing a family finding boot camp in Sydney, Australia, for 4 days for kids living in hotels because they couldn't find beds for these kids. And they were growing. Actually, the average age of these kids were 7-year-olds. And some of them have been in hotels for 2 years with rotating staff every day for 2 years. We're talking about kids under 8. Think about that. Because that's how we're going to keep them safe. And Tara happened to be home from Cambodia to have some health care, and she came and joined me. And here's what she said. I asked her, what have you learned in your work in Battambang? It's incredible. You have to take a look at this website. It's Cambodian Children's Trust. And the model's called the Village Hive model, HIVE. It's extraordinarily courageous child protection work. And here's what she said. She said, what I learned, she said, after 12 years of being here, in every instance, the family holds the solution. That's hard to get your head around when you're a child protection investigator and you know that dad's been, beating people to the point of putting them in the hospital. It's and people are struggling with addiction, and we've got young kids who are being neglected there, and it's gotten to be very dangerous, and we've had to have the police out. It's pretty hard to get your head around the idea that in every case the family holds the solution, because what you want to do is respond to, how could you be that way? How could you make those bad choices? That's the way our system teaches us to think. But Tara's experience was that family still holds the solution. That the end of the story is not the end of the investigation. In fact, it's the beginning of the story. How to, we're going to be challenged. How do you work with that dad who's gotten to a point in his life where he's that violent? How do we work with the mom who's been injured so deeply in her life that being numb to the world has become her preferred way of being? How do we respond to the children who have been hurt in the meantime? I'm not asking, I'm saying you have no choice but to answer those questions.
Right.
And the starting point is, in every instance, the family holds the solution.
Yeah. And that's really, that's really what I was just saying, was that there's so many checks and balances in the biological family that it's hard to reproduce that in a foster care system. And so what she's doing at Cambodian Children's Trust is she is going down the same vein that I'm going down, and I'm sure that you're going down and other people are going down as well, to say, hey, you know what safety is? And we've been saying this for decades. Safety is your uncle stopping by to make sure that your father's doing the right thing. Your auntie stopping by to make sure that your mother's doing the right thing. Your older cousin stopping by to make sure that you don't need any help with your homework. You know what I mean? It's your brothers and sisters coming home every day from school. It's the dog running in and out of the house. It's your grandmother coming down the stairs, making sure that the doors are locked every night. That's what safety feels like. And so it's absolutely the case that, if you have a mother who's addicted to drugs, a father who's absent, okay, does that mother know what it means to be a mother? Where do we provide definition of mother, definition of father, definition of uncle, cousin, auntie, niece, nephew? Where do we provide all these definitions, although it may be new material, for people to take in and adjust to? And then I have another question. How do we equip foster parents with tools to relate to children that they don't know?
Well, I think, again, we have a pattern in this system of isolating people, including foster parents. In my experience as a foster parent was, and I've always practiced, to the best of my ability, I've always tried to practice an unconditional care value. So, and I take teenagers. So what happens to me on Friday nights? My phone's ringing. If I've got an empty bed, my phone's going to be ringing, because they know I'm not going to say no, and they're going to bring them. But, and I love it, bring them. But here's the point. They bring them, I take them, and then nobody calls me back.
Right.
It's me and a kid now sitting here fighting to get a phone call back from somebody.
Yes.
So everywhere you turn in the system, everybody's lonely. Everyone's isolated into their role. So
Right.
the first thing is you don't build a system like that,
Right.
because these problems are impossible. What the truth is that we've got a child protection system because um, we've got a society that's got big problems that we refuse to face. We're not facing the reality of racism. We're not facing the reality of the legacy of segregation. We're of the deepening and widening inequality that's going on right now in the face of a pandemic. It's just growing larger by the moment. We're not facing those problems, and so instead, we built a child welfare system to sit on the edge of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me
this,
ask you something.
this is complex. This is no small thing at all. And quite frankly, one of the mistakes the child welfare people would make is to continue to act like somehow they can fix this on their own. We can't. We've got a big problem to face, and we better start reaching out and joining with people as we confront it.
Lives, hundreds of thousands of lives are in the balance. My youngest brother is currently behind bars, serving a 20 to 40-year sentence, and I don't think that he ever had a chance to figure out how to live life properly.
But let's change the story though with your brother, because you kind of mentioned this earlier, that had not happened to him, and meaning that whatever put him in prison for up to 40 years had not happened. Instead, but the same story, but instead he became a parent, right? And tried to father his kids and couldn't do it well. The point you made earlier, I want to go back to about that mom who doesn't know how to be a mom. The first step in being able to be a mom might be learning how to be you.
Wow.
You better be ready to go deep. I always say this, go deep and then go deeper still and then go deeper again. If we're going to really do this, we're going to have a workforce of healers, not judgers.
Absolutely.
The neighbors will do the judging.
Without a doubt. Go ahead and preach, Kevin. I'm going to sit back and listen.
I'm sorry. I'm worked up now.
No, you're right. I mean,
who doesn't want that job? Who doesn't want the job of standing with people and going to the places you've got to go with? Boyle's position was, we don't go to the margins to rescue people. He says about himself, the rescuing's for the Coast Guard. The exciting part about doing this is you go to as Boyle speaks about this, you go to the margins not to rescue people, but to find rescue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You go stand with real people who are up against what this society has built. Because if you can stand with them, we can rebuild this society in a way that gets to justice. But we won't stand with them. Instead, we stand against them.
And again, like you said, we have to change the narrative. We have to stand with them. We all have to stand together. We have
them is us. Them is us.
Yes, exactly. We have to stand together.
Yeah.
We have to stand together. We have to work on ourselves. We have to teach one another how to work on ourselves. And then we have to have a culture of healing. Like you said, not a culture of judgment, but a culture of healing. And I believe that the child welfare system is a smaller picture of the entire world. If we can get it right, in child welfare, the rest of the world will be okay. I've had such a great conversation with you today. I want to ask you 4 questions before we get out of here.
Okay.
I wish we had more time, but maybe we can talk sometime in the future. First, what is family finding?
Well, it was this thing. One of the things in 2 weeks in that group home, I learned what shaped my whole career. This kid's got nobody, they said. This kid's got nobody. And it shaped the first 20 years of my career. And permanency planning came in the mid 90s. And it was and it was about finding people who would take kids who had nobody. But we weren't finding them for older teenagers, and we were putting them on the streets and putting them in prison instead. Wow. And so I came up with 3 questions. Is it really true this kid's got nobody? Is it really true their caseworkers too busy to find them if they had somebody? And finally, if we did find people, would they care about this kid? And so, and the truth was that we found that for 94% of these kids that we said had nobody, that they had large groups of people. So that's all it was. It was really attempting to answer these 3 questions, because that at the end of it, what we were getting at to was a really deep issue, and that was simply this. It wasn't. No one ever believed these kids had nobody. We believed they had nobody that counted.
Right.
No one ever believed that a kid had no earthly father.
Right.
We believe they had no father who counted. That's what the family finding was about. And we revealed that truth. And then the next truth I revealed in 2014 was the glimmers of the fact that if they really existed, then it wasn't about building a system to find people we liked better. It was now going to be a challenge about how do we become the healers that we need to be. And I'm working right now on my next model that we'll be releasing late this year. But which is and I will be clear, my whole work is really it's an attempt to be evolutionary. It isn't one thing. It's about an evolving story, and it's an evolving story with thousands of people around the world, some who are on this call, that we're doing together. And it's an evolving story of how do we collectively build a just system, which means we need a just society.
Absolutely. Kevin, I see that you're willing to have a conversation about how do we make this whole entire circumstance better. And for me, being somebody who came out of the system, anytime I get a chance to get into a conversation and potentially get into a relationship that would enable me to be a part of a solution, I get extremely, extremely excited. And so I'm thankful for this conversation today. I hope that this has planted more seeds in a forest of change for youth and families and workers and care. And I appreciate you today. I want to ask you, though, what is greatness to you?
What is what?
Greatness.
Oh, wow. We got one sacred life on this planet.
Yep.
Whatever greatness is, make it count.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I respect your work. I want to give you your crown today while you're still living. I want to encourage our community to protect you. We need to protect you spiritually, and we need to protect you literally by standing with you. I stand with you. And I want to let the world know that you, Kevin Campbell, is America's next motivator. You're very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for your support. And tune in tomorrow for another installment of America's Next Motivator. Bye-bye. Absolutely.